All right, hey guys. So let's go over a quick week 4 lecture quiz for physiology. So we went over the endocrine system. We went over like endocrinology, basically, right? Which is going to be the study of hormones. So we want to understand that the endocrine system is going to be responsible for like all of these functions, right? Metabolism, regulation of internal environment of our body, reproduction, growth, development, things like that. I also want you to remember the endocrine system, like the reflex, right? A basic reflex pathway for the endocrine system, right? It's going to start off with a stimulus, right? Then that's going to get go to a sensor. That sensor is going to have an input signal that's going to go to the integration center. Then the integration center is going to integrate that information, right? Put out an output signal. And that output signal is going to go to either one or more targets. And then ultimately, we're going to have a response. Okay, so remember these steps in this endocrine reflex pathway. Okay. And so I put this here just so you can go over yourself for sure, right? Just looking at the different hormones that the body will produce. I absolutely love this table or this image because it gives you the location. As you can see right here, it gives you the actual hormone that's being produced. It gives you its primary targets and the main effects, right? So for example, let's just look at parathyroid hormone, right? That's going to be produced by the parathyroid gland. So the parathyroid gland will produce PTH, or parathyroid hormone. This hormone, yes, is produced by the parathyroid gland. Remember that parathyroid gland is going to be those 4 dots located on the back of the thyroid gland. But that parathyroid hormone is going to go to the bones and the kidneys, right? Ultimately, to regulate plasma calcium and phosphate levels, basically to increase plasma calcium levels, right? So this is a great image so you can go over it though. Now, the hypothalamus, right, it's going to be that gland in your brain that controls your hormone system, right? It's going to be a dual organ, right? So it has neural functions and it has endocrine functions. For example, some of its neural functions is able to control body temperature, hunger, thirst, circadian cycles, things like that, right? You have hunger centers in there that control hunger and thirst, things like that, right? Now, it also has endocrine activity as well, right? So one of its endocrine activities is it releases those regulatory hormones or those trophic hormones, right? And those trophic hormones are going to act on the anterior pituitary gland that sits right underneath it, right? So this is the hypothalamus, and this is the anterior pituitary. And so, for example, the hypothalamus will release TRH, right? Thyrotropin releasing hormone, gets sent down that hypophyseal portal system, and then it's going to stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to release TSH, right? That's thyroid stimulating hormone. Then that'll go to the thyroid gland to produce T3, T4 to maintain homeostasis within the body, things like that, right? Now, I'm going to talk about the anterior lobe in just a second, but the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Now, remember, right, another function of the hypothalamus is to produce vasopressin and oxytocin. So in the hypothalamus, we're producing vasopressin, which is antidiuretic hormone, ADH, right? And we're also producing oxytocin. So in the hypothalamus, we're producing ADH and oxytocin. However, it's just simply released via the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. And you can kind of see right here, this is that neuron. Let's change the color for us. Okay, let's go to blue. This is that whole neuron that I'm drawing in blue, right? You have the cell body up here, right? This is the axon, right? And this is the axon terminal right here. And so ADH and oxytocin is made up here, right? It's just stored here in the axon terminal, and it's the axon terminal that's located in the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Okay, and remember, oxytocin is important because it's going to go to those mammary glands for milk ejection. Okay, not to get confused with, let's do that first, right? Not to get confused, oxytocin with prolactin. Remember, oxytocin is for milk ejection, right? And prolactin, that's for milk production, okay? And prolactin is going to be released by the anterior pituitary gland, right? So the anterior pituitary is going to secrete 6 hormones that we see right here, okay? Those 6 are going to be prolactin, TSH, right, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, also known as thyrotropin. It's also going to release the hormone adrenocorticotropin hormone, which is ACTH. It's going to release growth hormone, GH. It's going to release follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. And it's also going to release luteinizing hormone, LH. Okay? These are the 6 hormones that are produced by the anterior pituitary. So not 5, right? Not 4, not 3, but 6. And remember all 6 of these, please. Okay? And just if you're wondering, is that right here, this portion right here. So let's look at it a little bit closer, just because I know some might have questions, right? This portion of the anterior pituitary is called the pars distalis, right? That's the pars distalis, right? That's the major portion. But this portion right here in the middle, can I draw it in a different color? This is the pars intermedius, right? And that's going to be that's going to be responsible for producing the melanocyte stimulating hormone. Okay, and just while we're on it, just because someone would have asked, this right here, notice how that anterior wraps around that infundibulum. This portion of the anterior pituitary is called the pars tuberalis. Okay, and that shows you how this anterior pituitary is actually like true endocrine tissue, because it actually wraps around that infundibulum region, right? And it's that infundibulum region right here, right, that literally is an extension of neural tissue. It extends from the hypothalamus, right? And that's how it makes the neural hypophysis, the neural tissue of the endocrine gland. Okay. All right. So remember, just another hormone. Remember, the pineal gland will secrete melatonin, and actually, serotonin actually is a precursor of melatonin, and it also helps to control biological rhythms such as body temperature, appetite, sleep cycles, things like that. Okay. Now, when we're looking at the adrenal cortex, right? So we know the hypothalamus will produce CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. That's going to go to the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland to produce ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone will go to the adrenal cortex, right? Specifically, really to produce cortisol. But when we're looking at the adrenal cortex, it's going to be made up of 3 distinct layers, right? We have and different hormones that's going to be produced by the adrenal cortex. It's going to be those steroid hormones, though, okay? Remember that. Now, the adrenal cortex is able to produce aldosterone. Remember aldosterone. This is going to be very important because we're going to be able to reabsorb water and sodium, right? So if blood pressure is low, blood volume low, we'll be able to produce aldosterone via the RAS system, and I'll go into that in a second. But remember the function of aldosterone: reabsorb water and sodium. Okay. Cortisol is going to be produced by that middle layer, right? The zona fasciculata. Cortisol is produced by the adrenal cortex, and it helps to mediate long-term stresses, right, protect against hypoglycemia, and it has an overall metabolic effect, right? Now remember that levels are naturally going to be higher in the morning and they're going to diminish throughout the night, okay? Those are going to be those cortisol levels. And also the adrenal cortex, right, is going to be able to produce those androgens, right? So it's going to be able to produce things such as the DHEA, right? Aldosterone, we mentioned. Cortisol, we mentioned, right? Those cholesterol-based molecules, okay? And that DHEA will be able to make those androgens, things like that, or the testosterone, the estrogen. That's going to be important for there, okay? Now that thyroid gland, right, that's located in your neck region, right? That thyroid gland has a few different type of cells, right? So we have the thyrotropes, or the thyroid cells, right? Um, let's talk about the C cells first, because the C cells, right? These C cells are going to be able to secrete calcitonin, and calcitonin is going to be important to reduce blood calcium levels, okay, to tone it down. Now, the thyroid hormones, right, which is calcitonin is one of them, but we also have T3 and T4. They're going to be produced here in that follicle space, okay? And so, in order for these thyroid hormones to be produced, number one, we need to have iodine in our diet, right? And iodine is going to be uptaken to the cell, right? Uptaken to this thyroid cell via symport, right? Along with sodium, okay? So remember that iodine will be uptaken in the cell along with sodium via that symport transporter, okay? Now, iodine gets in the cell, is able to combine, right, to make T3, T4. And the only way iodine is able to, get inserted into these molecules, because remember these tyrosine, these T3, T4, these are tyrosine-based molecules. These are amino acid-based molecules coming from tyrosine, right? Because they use tyrosine as the precursor. But it's this thyroid peroxidase, TPO, right, is this thyroid peroxidase that is able to assist this chemical reaction of adding this iodine group to the tyrosine, right, of adding this iodine group to the tyrosine. So we go from iodide to iodine, and we're able to transport that iodine group to the T3, T4 molecules, okay? And so when a target cell needs to use T3, T4, what they're going to do is they're going to use these enzymes, right, to remove the iodine from T4 to make it T3, right? These deiodinases, right? These enzymes that remove these iodine groups, okay? Now, calcium, we talked about calcium just briefly when I mentioned calcitonin. Calcitonin is a hormone that helps to reduce plasma concentrations of calcium. But what if calcium is too low, right? And we need calcium to be increased into the plasma. And that's going to be the help of parathyroid hormone, right? Parathyroid hormone is these little glands that's produced by, or the parathyroid hormone is produced by the parathyroid glands, right? That's going to be on the back of the thyroid gland. And so they're going to be responding to produce parathyroid hormone in response to low blood calcium levels, right? And so they're going to do a few things. They're going to enhance renal absorption of calcium. They're going to indirectly help to increase intestinal absorption of calcium too, right? By promoting the synthesis of calcitriol, which is vitamin D. Vitamin D goes from the kidneys to the intestines, and then in the intestines, vitamin D helps with the uptake of calcium, and that's how we can increase calcium absorption into the body and thus increase plasma calcium levels, right? Now, there's some other endocrine tissues or other organs that have endocrine functions, right? So remember the pancreas is a dual organ, so it has both endocrine and exocrine functions. But the pancreas is able to produce insulin and glucagon, and of course they're going to be able to control blood glucose levels. The kidneys, remember, will produce EPO or erythropoietin to stimulate red blood cell production in bone marrow, and this is going to be in response to low blood oxygen levels. Okay, and of course we have the thymus, right? This is where we're able to produce the thymus hormones, right? This is an organ that is the site for maturation of T cells, right? This is where your T cells will mature, come from the bone cells, the bone marrow, they go to the thymus to mature. This is just an overall specialized organ that produces and releases substances to perform different functions in the body. Now remember the RAS system. Now the RAS system I give you here, some people, or sometimes you'll see it as RAS, and other times you'll see it as RAAS. So it's going to stand for renin, angiotensin, aldosterone, system, right? So what's going to happen is this system is going to be activated when we have a drop in blood pressure. Okay? So if you're dehydrated, you don't have that much blood volume, right? And obviously blood volume is going to be directly associated with blood pressure. So if you have a reduced blood volume, you have a reduced blood pressure. And so what happens is the arterioles in your kidneys, that's going to recognize the low blood pressure. And so in your kidneys, in your renal system, right, your kidneys will produce renin, right? That's the first one. It's going to produce renin, right, from the kidneys. And so renin will then get into the bloodstream, and it's going to convert angiotensinogen, okay, into angiotensin 1. It just cleaves it and it converts it into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 now is in the bloodstream, and it travels to the lungs, where there is a enzyme called ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. And so in the lungs, angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2 is a powerful vasoconstrictor, right? So it's going to vasoconstrict your blood vessels to increase your blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 will also cause the adrenal gland, the adrenal cortex, to release aldosterone. And aldosterone, again, will be released from the adrenal cortex. It'll go to the kidneys, and that will increase renal absorption of sodium and water. So if we can increase our absorption of water, we won't lose it, right? Thus increasing blood volume, thus increasing blood pressure. Okay? So this is the RAS system. Now, going over some general properties from chapter 10, right? There are 4 major groups of sensory receptors. These are going to be chemoreceptors, mechanoreceptors, photoreceptors, and thermoreceptors. And remember, when we're looking at those special sense receptors, right, those special senses, we're going to have 5 taste sensations. Taste is also called gustation, right? So we're going to have, again, 5 taste sensations, not 4. They're going to be sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Remember that, okay? Now, there's other sensors that we have, right? Other special senses that we have. Visual, which is, the sense of light, or the sense of sight, I should say, right? Whereas basically light is reflected from objects in the environment, and they're going to be translated into mental images for us. And so we have those retinal cells, right? Those retinal cells, they're going to include, remember that your retinal cells include rods, cones, bipolar cells, amacrine cells, horizontal cells, right? So they're going to include all of these cells, right, of the retina. Now for hearing, remember hearing is your ear portion, right, where we have hearing and equilibrium, right? So in the inner ear we have the equilibrium, where we have that vestibular apparatus in the semicircular canals, right? It's the cristae of the semicircular canals of the inner ear that monitors rotational acceleration of the head, okay? Rotational acceleration of the head. Now hearing, right, the ability to hear, right, that's going to be from the cochlea, so in the inner ear, really, right? Using that cochlea, that snail-like organ, excuse me, because the cochlea is going to have that organ of Corti, right? It's going to start off to begin with that oval window and the round window. But it's within the cochlea that you can see, can we zoom in a little bit right here, right? It's going to have the stereocilia, right? This is going to be that stereocilia, right? And you can see the movement of that stereocilia, right? And what's going to happen is that stereocilia, it contains these ion channels that's able to transduce the vibration that's coming into our ear, and that's how we can we sense hearing, right? And then one of the other senses we have is olfaction, the sense of smell. Remember that olfaction, right? One of the key things about olfaction is it does not pass through the thalamus to get integrated, okay? Like how things like visual centers, right, is in the back, and occipital lobe, right? Visual neurons, they have to go past the thalamus. However, olfaction does not pass through the thalamus for integration, okay? And another thing, right, nociceptors. Nociceptors are going to be these free nerve endings found in the skin at a variety of organs and the GI tract. But nociceptors, they're going to be responsible for pain perception, though, right? And so, for example, you know how if you have pain in a certain area, right, or in a localized area, right, that's going to be referred to as, or called, I should say, referred pain, okay? And that was the quiz review for week 4.